Good morning. Just want to echo what Brian just said. I agree. We sounded pretty good today. But then I could probably say something cheesy about worshiping the Lord always sounds good in his ears. And that would be true, even if I do feel kind of corny for saying it. Our sermon from today is going to actually be taken from the book of Proverbs, which is not too far away from the book of the songs in the Old Testament. We're going to be looking first at one a little bit later in the book of Proverbs, then we'll go to the front of the book there. So let's start in chapter 21. As you're turning to chapter 21, I want you to think about something and have this word sort of floating around in your head, because we're going to hear it a couple of times. Continuing our sermon series on spiritual anatomy, we're going to talk about a proud or a prideful heart. That word probably evokes several different ideas in your mind, but I want to challenge what we think of as pride or arrogance and put it into the context of Scripture. I think a lot of times when we talk about being proud of something, that's one of those words in English where if you're using it outside of church, you mean one thing, and you use it inside the church building, you might be convinced that it means something different. Because if I say, oh, I'm so proud of my niece, she's so smart, nowadays she's starting to read, and she hasn't even started kindergarten yet, isn't that so exciting? Now, I'm not bragging because I didn't do anything. My sister raised my niece. So, she gets to be the one who takes all the credit, right? She's just someone who I'm proud of because of the accomplishments she has undertaken. And you might even say something to the effect of, well, I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud to be from West Virginia. I say that one a lot more than the other one nowadays. And I'll say things from some time to time. I'll see people say stuff like, the high school I'll be teaching at this year, one of their big signs you'll see is Patriot Pride. Just meaning, I'm happy to be going to this school. I'm glad to say I'm one of the people who attends this institution. Now, are any of those sinful things that we've just talked about, right? Are any of those things that we ought to be ashamed of? No. This is one of those things. I want you to take that word, that proud word, pride, prideful, and kind of be able to be flexible in the meaning. If it helps, you can just substitute the word proud that we'll be using today with the word arrogant, because that has an inherently negative meaning. If I tell you somebody is arrogant, you are not going to have a single positive impression of that person. If I tell you they're proud, you might think, oh, okay, well, there can be some positivity to that. But what we're going to be talking about today is a proud heart, an arrogant heart, a heart that has a negative and negatively elevated thought about itself, an overly high estimation of the self. So let's talk about this in a little more detail after we get our scriptures. Proverbs 21 verse 1 says the following: In the Lord's hand, the king's heart is a stream of water that he channels towards all who please him. A person may think their own ways are right, but the Lord weighs the heart. To do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked, produce sin. The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty, and a fortune made by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a deadly snare. I want to talk about a slight change that you may see if you heard my translation versus what you might have read. In verse 4, there's one word that, depending on what vowel you put in it in Hebrew, means two completely different things. So, if you say ner or near, you have two completely different concepts that could be expressed by that one word. Now, if yours said an unplowed field, you've got one of them. A lamp is the other one. The important part here is the context we're going to be looking at it. In a little bit, I'm going to take you to the New Testament, to a place where I think Jesus is actually referencing this passage, and he's going to be talking about a lamp. So we're going to use the lamp translation for our purposes for our lesson today. It's suffice to say, I won't be settling the debate on how to translate this passage because it's been going on for a while. Bible's kind of an old book, and depending on this one letter difference, you could get a different interpretation. I'm not going to be, changing history here, but it does fit into our lesson we'll be looking at. And just in case you're wondering how this could happen, that you get a completely different word, Biblical Hebrew, the language that the scriptures are written in, the old texts, has no vowels. If I write certain words, if I just put, for example, the word him up here on this board over here, and I take that Y out, you could probably still figure out what word it is based on the context. You would be able to do the same thing with most Hebrew words most of the time. They just, based on context, I'll give you the opportunity to guess. But in this particular translation, in this particular text, we have a little bit of a problem because one letter, one vowel can make a big, big difference. Okay, so if we're saying that this is a lamp, it helps us when we're looking at the context as well, because what organ would you associate a plowed field with? An unplowed field is probably going to be your feet or your hands, right? Because you're going to be pushing the plow, you're going to be walking along, you'll be doing the act of plowing. But if we're talking about seeing, a lamp makes a lot of sense. So let's read that verse again with this context in mind. Haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked produce sin. So what you are able to perceive, the light that you receive, produces sin. So let's go back to our broader context here. Let's talk about our arrogance for a moment that we want to examine. The proud heart, the arrogant heart, comprises something more than just confident knowledge of self. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you all of the things I've accomplished in my life because it's actually something I'm relatively bad at. If you tell me to tell stories about myself, I can do that. But I'm really bad at writing resumes or letters of recommendation for myself. I can't tell you what's good about me. Other people can do that, and that's good. That's what they're supposed to do. But I have a really hard time with that. But I can tell you that what I'm good at, I'm good at. I like to draw, and I think I'm a pretty good artist. I like preaching, and I think I'm a pretty good speaker. But those things that I can say that I'm proud of being able to do are completely different than being arrogant in those particular aspects of my life. At one place in particular that I think I'm pretty good at, that I'm happy to participate in, is my cooking. I like to cook. But every once in a while, I'll make something and get knocked down a peg. Marina will taste something and say, no. So my confidence based on my skills and my pride in being able to accomplish it are not things that make me so arrogant that I think I'm invincible or make me open to problems. I know that I'm sometimes a little bit sloppy when it comes to cooking. I know sometimes when I'm speaking, I'll quote something wrong or I'll misinterpret a passage. My biggest mess up, my biggest mistake as a preacher was thinking that the name John and the name Jonah were the same. I had a whole sermon based on how, John the Baptist has the dove come down when Jesus is baptized, and the name Jonah means dove, and so there was no connection. I made the connection up. John's name comes from a Yohanan, one of the kings in the Old Testament, and it's a completely different name. But I very confidently preached a whole sermon about that and had to issue a retraction later. So if I was arrogant, I would have never realized my mistake. I would have just lived in ignorance for the rest of time. So arrogance is different from just being proud or being confident. It's not equal to a sense of accomplishment or a willingness to list out one's own achievements. So let's ask the question. If there's nothing wrong with being confident and knowing yourself and knowing what God has enabled you to accomplish, why are boasting and bragging wrong? What crosses the line and makes boasting and bragging a sin when simply just having a resume or acknowledging you've accomplished something is fine? What is the difference between a brag and just being humbly acknowledging your own accomplishments? The only difference between those two things is the posture of the heart. It's an attitude problem. Now, I've said this before, but in aviation and rocketry, your attitude is the direction that you're pointing the payload that you're trying to launch. Your attitude is the direction that you are pointed in before the momentum even gets started. If your attitude is wrong, you'll miss your trajectory and you won't make it into orbit if you're trying to fly a rocket. And so attitude of the heart, your posture of the heart, the position it's in, makes a big difference before you even get started. Because if somebody says, Ethan, go up there and tell everybody everything you've ever done, and I do it with the intent to belittle others, put others down, put myself above, that's where the arrogance comes in. But if I do it just out of sense of, well, here's how I've got where I am, here's something about myself, and I'm happy to have accomplished it, I'm proud and pleased, but not proud and arrogant, there's a big difference between those two things. So let's look at this a little bit more. You'll notice that in this proverb, the prideful heart and the haughty eyes are embedded in a passage that's about accomplishing things in life. First of all, it says, in the Lord's hand, the king's heart is a stream of water that he channels towards all who please him. In other words, if you please the Lord, those in power will acknowledge you and make things go your way. That God guides the king, in this case, those in authority, to do things to satisfy and benefit God's people. But at the same time, the one writing the Proverbs encourages some humility in this. How can you tell you're a person who pleases the Lord? Well, you can't do that by your own estimation. In verse 2, it says, a person may think their own ways are right, but the Lord weighs the heart. So in your heart, you can determine, oh, I'm doing the right thing. I've made the right choice. This is a smart thing for me to do. But ultimately, the Lord will weigh the entirety of your heart and not just your thoughts. What was your attitude? What was your posture towards the Lord? What were you thinking and intending, and where were your priorities when you went to do the things you were planning to do? And verse 3 expands on this. To do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. In other words, it's not about performing religiosity. It's not about showing up and doing all the sacrifices at the right time, but rather having the heart of a person who is offering a sacrifice. It's not about performing all of the things that a person is supposed to do to look right, but being a person who does the right thing. The attitude of the heart really matters here. And that's where we arrive to the main verse that we were focused on so far. Haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked produce sin. The reason why I wanted to look at this passage in particular today to build on what we looked at last week is because the eyes and the heart, again, are about the focus and then the decisions we make based on where we are focused spiritually. Your eyes as a spiritual organ, as our metaphor that we're building as we look at our spiritual anatomy, are not merely just what you perceive, but what you are intending to look at. What do you put your focus on? Where are you determined to rest your mind? What are you spending your time thinking about, aiming for, and doing? Because if your eyes are already in this position, haughty eyes, then you're already at a disadvantage in terms of your righteousness towards the Lord. In the Hebrew, the expression is, or the idiom is, wide eyes. Not necessarily looking down, but seeing broadly. So, if you have ever watched somebody with an arrogant attitude walk into a room, what do? They scan the whole place. Are all eyes on me? Who's focused? Who sees me? I should be the center of attention. And so these wide eyes, in this case, are not just merely open to seeing things or open from excitement or amazement, but in this expression, in the Hebrew idiom, it's scanning the room to make sure, is everybody paying attention to me? Am I the center of attention? Now, I'm the center of attention right now because I'm speaking, and that's my job. You're all supposed to be listening to me. But that's not because it satisfies my ego, but because I have a job to do. Somebody else was up here doing it, I'd be giving them the same attention. And indeed, that's what we will be doing in just a few moments at the Lord's table, right? So, in this moment, again, it's not about necessarily what is literally being done, but the attitude of the person. Scanning the room, making sure they are the center of attention. Haughty eyes and a proud heart produce sin. Continuing on, we're going to expand a little bit on what I think was being said in verse 2 there. The plans of the diligent lead to profit as sure as haste leads to poverty. A fortune made by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a deadly snake. We're talking about the relationship between the person's proud heart and God's willingness to provide a person with prosperity. Now, I know a lot of times when we're talking about gospel sermons, we want to avoid talking about worldly wealth or prosperity or economic gain of any kind, because we might sound like one of those televangelists. We might sound like one of these guys who are like, well, if you tithe and you give your little extra gift and you give your seed money, then the Lord will bless you and you'll reap a fortune, right? I'm not doing any of that today. I'm just talking about Scripture. And what the Scripture says is that the attitude with which you approach the amount of money and the amount of responsibilities God has given you right now determines the outcome of that. If you've only got one seed and you plant it and you tend it, whatever plant that you've grown will have more seeds and you'll grow more. I don't care if you've got a tomato, corn, anything else. There is almost no plant on earth that grows just one seed per seed, because those plants would not survive, would they? That's kind of the whole point. A plant wants to make more plants. In the same way, God has not given you the little or the lot that He's given you so that you can grow a little. If you are cultivating what God provides you in a godly way, in a responsible way, in a righteous way, He wants to then lead those diligent, righteous plans into profit and growth. Because ultimately that benefits Him. He reaps the benefits of your prosperity. And that's the principle that's being set out here in Proverbs chapter 21. If we go to Proverbs chapter 6, we're going to touch on one more thing before we go look at how Jesus uses these passages. Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 16 says the following. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to Him. What's the first thing on the list? Verse 17 says, haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. So if you're making a list of all of the things, the 6 worst things that a person can have, the first thing on the list is to look down on others. And then pretty quickly in that list is a heart that devises wicked schemes, a mind that makes up evil plans. This is a little different from the proud heart in the other passage, but the haughty eyes is the same. And if we look at it in the context of what had been said about that proud heart, it's not all that different from the wicked heart mentioned here. Because you'll remember that our proud heart and the haughty eyes paired together in chapter 21, verse 4, are the lamp that leads or produces sin. So, let's take a look at what Jesus has to say about all of this in Matthew chapter 6. Now, this passage will seem familiar to you because we were just there not too long ago, although we didn't particularly spend time on this section of the passage in that sermon. So, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 22, remember that we're talking about this verse from the Proverbs where he says, "The haughty eyes and the proud heart are the lamp of the wicked, and they produce sin." That's our passage from Proverbs. Haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked produce sin. In Matthew 6:22, Jesus says this, "The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." So there's an interesting connection here, I think, in a couple of different ways. Proverbs chapter 21 was very focused on prosperity, that the king's heart will be guided to those who are righteous before the Lord. The plans of the righteous bring profit. That there's this connection between righteousness and prosperity, that your life will be taken care of. God will tend to you. And Jesus is making a similar connection here. It's not just the eyes and the lamp. There's more connective tissue here in this web that's being spun. So let's take a look at our passage from Jesus in bit by bit. First of all, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. That sounds a lot like the eyes, the haughty eyes, the lamp of the wicked, produce sin. So when Jesus is talking about this, he's talking about this right in the middle of store up your treasures in heaven. He's talking about this right after this. He will go into, don't worry about your life because God clothes the flowers of the field and he feeds the birds of the air. This is right in the middle of what should your attitude towards material things be? God will take care of you. That's the answer. And so in that passage, in that context, Jesus says, if your eye, if your focus, if the place where you're putting your attention is in darkness, then your whole body will be in darkness. There's been very few times in my life that I have had to be in an unfamiliar place in the dark. But one of the most common times is being in a hotel room. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten out of bed in a hotel, not knowing where any of the furniture is, and stubbed my toe on the way to the bathroom. I mean, it's probably the most universal experience for anybody who's actually, been in a hotel room in an unfamiliar place. I always have to pull the curtains closed because I can't sleep with any lights on. I can't leave the bathroom light on or anything like that. I have to, if I want to sleep, it's got to be in total darkness. That's just, that's my weakness, I guess. I have to have that experience. And so the downside to that is when I get up, I've either got to fumble around to find my flashlight and turn it on my phone, or stub my toe. Why did I stub my toe? It's not because of the environment. I didn't move that chair into the position where I'd hit my toe on it on purpose when the lights were on. But I also didn't memorize where it was because it's an unfamiliar environment. I didn't, put that wall there in a weird spot. So when I'm trying to walk to the bathroom, it's a little bit further out than I was thinking. And I hit my toe on it. But I still hit my toe on it. If my eye is full of darkness, the whole body will be full of darkness. The only reason I got hurt is because I couldn't see where I was going. Here's the point Jesus is making. Arrogance will blind you. You think you know where you're going, but you don't. Arrogance is an ailment that clogs up the heart and keeps you from seeing where you're really going. Here's the thing about arrogance. If you had two men who are equally accomplished, have done all the exact same things in their life, and the only difference is one was arrogant about it and one is humble, who is right in that situation? Let's just say, for example, we've got two doctors. They both studied at the same school, graduated with the same grades, they're working at the same hospital, and they're getting the exact same salary. But we've got one who's humble and does it in pursuit of caring for his patients, and one who's arrogant and does it in pursuit of showing how smart he is. Now, I know I just described Dr. House from that show, House, but the whole point is that you've got a real difference between these two people in their heart. Who is actually going to care for their patients and do the right thing at the end of the day? The humble doctor will care for those patients more than the arrogant doctor will care about getting things right and looking. So, if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. There's an interesting word here in the Greek. The word for unhealthy has sort of a double meaning or a pun. It can also mean stingy, miserly, someone who is greedy and wants to keep their own things back and not be generous. So if your eye is greedy, if your eye is stingy, your whole body will be full of darkness. So there's a deeper or a more connected meaning to all of this as well. And it also helps us to bring about another meaning here. In the eye, if your eyes are healthy, the obverse is true. The opposite is true. If your eyes are generous, your whole body will be full of light. Let's wrap up our point here. The heart is where all of our thinking and feeling takes place. We know this. This is our spiritual mind. And the eyes are our focus. They determine where we are looking and thereby where we are going. But the difference between arrogance and this sort of negative version of pride, this harmful pride that the Bible talks about, is a difference between being a generous, spirited person who does the right thing because it's the right thing, who makes good plans and carries them out, and being a arrogant person who thinks of themselves as being above others and requiring their attention because they've earned it and deserve it, requiring their praise and everything else because they've earned it and deserve it. And the gap between those two things sets up this tension in which we have to examine where we are looking. Where is our focus? I'll finish up by saying this. Looking down on people is a spiritual posture that requires our awareness and our attention. As a Christian, we cannot afford to look down on anyone. If we are not proud, we cannot become proud of heart and haughty of eye simply by being pleased that we have been able to accomplish things. You can't become arrogant just by having a good life and doing good things. That's not what produces arrogance. What does is a focus on the self, a focus on congratulating yourself, a focus on wanting to enrich yourself, a focus on wanting to build yourself up and not others. You'll notice again how Jesus finished out this passage in verse 24, after talking about healthy and unhealthy eyes, generous and stingy eyes. In verse 24, he said, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Why does this matter? Because arrogance of the heart and pride in the eyes are exemplified and brought into focus by Jesus here as essentially being idolatry. That arrogance in your heart is the same as worshiping money instead of the Lord. Now, if your first response to that is, well, money is not that big of a deal, think about all the things you can get with money. Power, status, fame, praise, stuff. The arrogance that we are looking for, that we're trying to test for, might not actually look like somebody being a money grubber. But what it will look like is this proud attitude where money and status and wealth and all the other things that come with it are over people. You can't love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself if you're focused on your wealth. But on the other hand, if the balance goes the other direction, and you love the Lord your God with all your heart, and you love your neighbor as yourself, the Proverbs tell us that God will make you prosperous. He's going to prioritize the plans of the righteous. So there's two outcomes here, and both of them can lead to the same type of a life from a material standpoint. You know, rich people can be arrogant, and arrogant people can be rich. But God says that the humble and those who look on others with a humble heart can be prosperous as well. And that it's really down to faith in Him and His generosity that He's shown to us. I hope this lesson has been one that's been beneficial to you today, one that we can take and apply to ourselves as a test and think about our own position of the heart. From a material standpoint, the whole point is those two people can look exactly the same, the arrogant man and the humble man. But the difference is their attitude towards God and the focus of their eyes. Where are they looking, and to whom are they following after? So if you find yourself somebody who is worshiping wealth today and in need of God's redemptive grace, we'd would like to offer this opportunity for baptism at this time. If you need prayers from the church for restoration or encouragement, we'd invite you to come forward as we stand and sing.